Now I'm going to pivot and we're going to delve deeper into the interplay of security and commercial space. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce Dr. Mir Sadat and Mr. Robert Fehrbach. Dr. Sadat is the founding editor-in-chief of the Space Force Journal. He's also a naval officer. He has served as a policy director on detail to the White House in the area of space policy. He holds a doctorate from the Claremont Union Graduate College. And Mr. Robert Fehrbach is a fellow misfit, as we think of ourselves, who found a home at Thunderbird. So he and I share an alma mater. He is an international space entrepreneur, businessman, started back in the day of Dish Network when Europe was allowing it, whereas the US wasn't, and has worked directly with the executives at SpaceX during the cowboy days when everybody was telling them they couldn't do it. Well, I guess you can tell them a few things now, can't you, sir? Most recently is the founder of Zero G Launch, which if you check out his LinkedIn profile or the website, Mr. Dan Hart may have a thing or two to say about that. So I think that's going to be some fun times in the modern space race that we can look forward to. Gentlemen, thank you so very much for joining me today. How are you guys?
Very well, thank you, Z.
Wonderful.
Glad to be here, and thank you for hosting us today.
Thank you.
Hey, Z, let me first of all thank you and thank everybody that's involved with Space Innovation Summit. And I'm humbled to be on the panel with Robert. Thank you.
Gentlemen, you know, I gave you a little bit of intros, but if I could toss it to both of you to all talk a little bit about your paths to space, because it's very instructive, I think, to our audience to explore the fact that one of you comes from a very deep policy and security perspective, whereas the other very much an entrepreneurial, economic, and commercial perspective. So maybe I could toss it to you first, Mir, to just kind of very briefly just tell us, you know, how did you vector into space?
First of all, let me be clear. I don't speak on behalf of the U.S. government or any of departments or agencies or anybody affiliated with the government. I'm speaking on behalf of myself. Just want to put that out there. About 6-7 years ago, my career originally started as an academic from the West Coast, and which brought me to the East Coast, and then eventually into government services. And I was involved in the national security enterprise for a long time, and that took me to multiple deployments to war zones, and then back to, you know, as you get promoted, you get administrative chops, and you can't do the fun things. And as I was looking at the world, I was getting depressed on a daily basis, and my training as an information warfare officer, Navy qualifications, required that I know a little bit of cyber, a little bit of space, a little bit of intelligence, oceanography, and so forth. And so I sought out some mentorship and said, hey, I want to branch into a different part and not constantly deploy because I have family that I want to be close to, and I want to do something a little bit different. It's very depressing what I'm doing because every time I go, the situation is getting worse. And so he said, what do you have in mind? And I said, cyber and space. And he said, take space. I was hoping he would say cyber because he was a cyber guy. And he said space. And I said, well, you know, I almost failed my Navy boards because space was my weakness. He said, even more so, and that will help you become a better naval officer. And so now I've sought advice from a really high person in the Navy. And what are you going to do? Walk out and just say, forget about it? Because he'll tell everybody about it, that he didn't take high advice from me. So I said, you know what, this is a great challenge. And I started. And so I worked within the Chief of Naval Operations space policy team there, small team, during the days when we were trying to build the Space Corps and going through all the parochial infightings within the services and the budget and just the idea of how do you do this. It hasn't been done since Billy Mitchell. And then that took me to the Navy's 10th Fleet. And along this time, I fell in love with it because really my passion is to support and equip the warfighter. The warfighter, so that the warfighter doesn't have to go to war, but he can deter war by doing certain actions, by informing his superiors, who can then get politicians involved and say, hey, so-and-so country, we see you moving there, we see you doing things. This is constituting a hostile act. And so that's when I said, I got to jump in full force and learn as much as I can that I have not learned yet and get into it. And that involved the commercial side because my side only involved the exquisite assets and capabilities we had. And so when I went to the White House, that gave me a great platform because the Space Council, that's mostly what they did. And then after that, due to the unfortunate COVID pandemic, I guess the benefit for me was I was not living in a secure, compartmented area, but I had access to my social media. And that's when I started researching, networking, and contacting and learning and setting like a weekly Zoom call with little companies who needed some advice from someone who's in the government. I was doing it pro bono because I'm a government employee, and me learning about their technology and how they are potentially going to disrupt the market or enhance the market. Or, hey, have you thought about talking to the Defense Innovation Unit? Because what you are doing could help you through the situation of COVID by expanding your base pool, right? So that's how I basically came to this. And now I'm just in love with the idea that we could be potentially disrupting our own markets. Americans could be disrupting their own markets on a weekly and monthly basis. And I think that is amazing. You know, it's probably not fun for the primes and some of those who have sort of taken those positions, but I think that's the only way you're going to advance as a nation. Over.
Thank you very much, Mir, for those remarks. And Robert, I'm going to basically ask you a very similar question. You know, can you tell us, the audience, a little bit about your perspective and background and how you got to space and how you've seen it evolve? Very different, I imagine, from what Mir just described.
Yeah, you know, when I was graduating as a young MBA many years back from our common school, Z, I was just about to sign a contract with General Motors. I'm a closet auto mechanic, and I like cars, and I like, you know, motors and engines and things. And so I was about to join GM and go to Ann Arbor, Michigan. And then this company came on board to interview, and it was called Ecosphere International. They now have the name as EchoStar International, the operator of Dish Network in the United States. And they were hiring a whole bunch of young MBAs that were multilingual to go to Europe, basically. Europe was launching these high power Ku band satellites that were going to revolutionize the marketplace, right? We were going from those big 12-foot dishes in the backyards that you see some abandoned backyards of the countryside today in the United States, where there are about 3 million of those at the time, receiving satellite signals from different positions. And this new pizza-sized dish technology was going to, potentially be very, very large. So Charlie Ergen, the current chairman of EchoStar, hired a whole bunch of young MBAs. So I went straight to Europe. I hadn't even graduated when I got the job offer, but because I wanted to be in Europe or back in Europe, I took the job. So we spent a couple of decades there, and I ended up doing a lot of data networks, also via satellite for SIS in Luxembourg. Spent another 6 years for the Eutelsat group as well. And then at one point, my wife wanted to bring back, she wanted to have the experience of putting our kids that were all born in Europe, putting the kids on the yellow bus, that nice little yellow bus that takes them to school, right?
Traditional American parental experience.
Exactly. She wanted to get that little, that she'd come back to she's from Montana, so she wanted to get that experience back. So although we'd been there close to 2 decades, we came back to the States, and then I spent time with Hughes Network Systems, in charge of all their international markets. And then, as you said, with SpaceX, being the space cowboys that you had yet a lot to prove, but eventually did. And then with Space Systems Loral. So I've done a little bit of robotics in space. I've done launch systems, and I've done design and financing and launch of multiple types of spacecraft and different types of sensors in them as well. So very, very much centered around the commercial markets today.
So I'm going to continue on and ask you kind of with your perspective, because from a commercial perspective, security and cybersecurity in space is still critical. What responsibility do you feel that the corporations you worked with had for security in space, possibly versus the government? What should these organizations be providing for themselves or as a service, as opposed to relying on the government to do it all?
Well, when you speak about security, and in particular, when we talk security in space, from my point of view anyway, you're talking about links that communicate with satellites and back to Earth, right? On Earth stations. And so to do that, you have to have, obviously a frequency allotted by the ITU or by the FCC that is your frequency for that particular orbital slot, if you're in GEO, let's say. So one of the things that we've learned in the industry is that securitizing those RF links is not always that as easy as one might like them to be. Yes, you're pointing at a very, very small spot in space and then back, but getting those securitized, they are prone to be disrupted sometimes, or interference is another issue that we have to deal with on an occasional basis. So there are new things that are coming up now in that domain, where we are looking at doing laser links now that are much, much more difficult to disrupt. Of course, laser links are subject to dispersion in the atmosphere. So those are issues that we have to deal with as well. But because you can now network satellites between themselves with links, RF links or laser links that are very, very quick, as General mentioned just a moment ago, General McLaughlin, having a distributed architecture of satellites that are interconnected, where you don't have a single point to attack, does create a more resilient system. But there are other layers that you need to put on top of that, of course, as he mentioned as well. So from my point of view, that we are taking the right steps right now from a commercial standpoint, but also to respond and to be cognizant of the needs of the DoD markets to be able to provide similar solutions to DoD primes and DoD operators as well, right? There are solutions to be had there, but each one of them has their own intricacies and specificities that we have to deal with. But the solutions are definitely there.
Thank you. And that kind of begs a question that I'm going to toss at Mir. Are we secure now? What threats are there to national security, but not only, but also possibly to all these commercial satellites that we've heard all throughout the morning, and that Robert has spent a career putting into orbit, and others that we've talked to are creating new models to put into orbit. Can you comment on that, sir?
Yeah, without getting into the specific,
sure,
I would say, Space Policy Directive that had some recommendations on cybersecurity that came out of the White House last year was a first step, right? Great move. Perhaps my national security hats, less of a commercial hat in this sense, I would have liked to have been a little bit more prescriptive than sort of describing the situation and saying, hey, industry, you come to a conclusion. I do understand that, and I've met the 4 or 5 sort of guys and gals in jeans in a garage somewhere putting something together, and then you're telling them, hey, this doesn't meet a specific cybersecurity standard. Going, that costs more than our entire endeavor. I understand that aspect, but the minute you put something up there, you want to make sure that it's something that cannot be penetrated and manipulated or disabled or used as another sort of device against something that's already pre-existing. So I do think we are very vulnerable. I think the industry needs to come to an agreement. I think NIST and DHS CISA should help from the government angle I do think as well that there needs to be a sort of a pool, right, where everybody encourages cybersecurity. And this may sound very, maybe even socialistic. That's not my intention. But maybe the richer companies help the newer companies and say, hey, your standards are very low. You are posing a danger for everybody else, basically on the roads, on the space lanes. So we're going to help you. We're going to help you create something, and we're going to let you share our capabilities, or the government subsidize that. Because I really feel like by the time the decade's over, we're going to have so much stuff up there, and so much stuff that's going to be potential to hijack or messing with, that we really won't. By that time, it'll be too late to come up with a standard, to come up with protocols and all of that. So we really need to start thinking about that now, and before the mid of the decade, to start finding ways to implement that on birds that are going up. So definitely in LEO, I think we are very much exposed. I don't see any of these things being hijacked or messed with right now, but a vulnerability is a vulnerability that could expose you. So that, I think that from that angle, we really do need to work. And industry really needs to look at the greater picture and look at the global pie, right? The global pie is huge, and if everybody starts investing in the ecosystem and in the chain, I think it will be better for everybody. But we got to find a way to lead that from the government as well.
Very interesting. Thank you. And so, Robert, based off of that paradigm, how do you feel the government can enable the commercial entities, whether they're professional consortia, possibly? One can imagine consortia of CubeSat providers and things emerging the way they have emerged in device electronics, in consumer electronics, for example, or companies themselves to basically to create these standards, to come together to help the smaller companies. It actually kind of brings to mind some of the things that the oil industry does, or the energy industry, I should say, where they have consortia that fund common services to all companies, possibly. Possibly security as a service. And gentlemen, we're in kind of the last 15 minutes of the discussion, so please go ahead and be prescriptive, because we at America's Future Series, we do want your ideas and recommendations to be to propagate out into the influencers that are joining us today. So please go ahead.
Well, let me sort of mention a particular type of service that has been now very much talked about. Some of the SPACs have responded to that by funding these companies and so forth, and that is in the on-orbit servicing or space tugs area of the business, right? This space tug business, and the idea that you can now approach, one satellite can approach another in space and either touch it or observe it or do maneuvers around a different asset in space, is something that, of course, we've heard about, the past few decades, from government actors, but now is becoming a tool that is available by the commercial markets. Now, you have companies like Momentus and Deorbit and Nastroscale and Moog and a few others that are all, touting their own solutions there. But that brings a real interesting conundrum, I would say, because by rendezvousing and servicing, or whatever it is that you do to grab a satellite, move it to a different orbital slot, or service it to repair it, or to install a module, whatever you have to do, there's a touch maneuver that you're doing, and there's also an observation element there. That brings a lot of issues in terms of regulatory environment, security from the government point of view, one government asset looking at an asset from another government. How do you deal with that? It's not something that's very, very clear today. There are a few organizations like Confers that are attempting to bring some all stakeholders to the table and talk about these kind of things and standards, as you mentioned, Z. But I think the government has to have some say there. And this also brings us to the other point of, when you have a licensed operator that has a frequency that is received to launch satellites into space, and now, Dr. Sadat mentioned there are a whole bunch of satellites, over 50,000 today, in fact, that have licenses already to launch in the next 10 years. If they all launch or not, we don't know, but they have licenses today. So with those sort of numbers, you have to have some sort of a minimum guideline of responsibility in terms of end-of-life disposal, regulatory environment. Government has to get involved a little bit in selling out, not constricting the commercial impetus and speed at which we can do things, but establishing some minimum guidelines for, for example, disposal, end-of-life disposal guidelines that have to be adhered to, and then maneuverability of satellites, things like that, that I think government can get involved with and still not, constrict the industry into slowing down too much, right?
Oh, that makes great sense. Thank you. Gentlemen, I think we're coming a little bit close to time, so I'm going to ask Mir for you to close us out with your recommendations for the ecosystem, whether it's for the commercial entities or government systems.
Yeah,
Entities.
I'll keep it short. If anybody's interested, they can Google my name on Political or thehill.com, and they can see some recent articles that we've published. One thing that we stressed in the last year from my peers was space as a critical infrastructure, right? Not the domain, the assets that are there and the information that we derive from it are critical, and they support the other critical infrastructures. And Namrata mentioned that earlier. So that's an important aspect, right? Because if it's a critical infrastructure, then you take things seriously. GPS is definitely critical infrastructure. Anybody who denies it lives in a cave without a mobile phone.
Right.
And it doesn't matter because they don't have signal there anyways, right? But so that is an important aspect, because right now we are looking down into the earth, as we should, right? We are looking at the Chinese who are having Muslims, Uyghurs in concentration camps. We're looking at Russia in the Arctic. We are looking at the sea change. We are looking at what is going on with climate all over the world and so forth. At some point, we're going to look up and out, right? We're going to look towards the cislunar and the far side. Robert mentioned Momentous. They want to go to the far side of the moon, and so we're going to have to build this infrastructure, not just to look down, but to look out and about. And that's something that we need to think about. And as this place gets polluted, we need to start making a tier of what is valuable for us, what is something that is vital to our existence, and what is something that is vital to our national security. And when I say national security, I mean everything in our livelihood, right? Economics as well. So one thing that I have not seen at all mentioned, and I mentioned it a couple of times, and people kind of say, hey, that's a great idea, but it's too hard to do. We need just like the Artificial Intelligence Commission, we need a commission on national innovation, an ecosystem, not just about space, but all of it, map it out. Where is our nation at, right? And so we can leverage all of the economic sectors and what can we use from that to solve problems here on Earth, right? There are guys and gals in garages looking up like, hey, I want to do this. This is how it's going to solve that problem. But that problem might actually solve some problems here on Earth, and it might actually have implications for people in dire straits. So that should be an important aspect. That policy should forecast opportunities, requirements, areas of improvement for the next decade on how we are going to keep our strategic advantage against another nation that is trying to usurp our leadership role. And it looks at us as an adversary, right? So how do we do that, right? And that's an important piece I think we need to look at. The investments that we need to make into science and technology and R&D, sometimes it even needs to go hand in hand. And someone just wrote that National Science Foundation is doing that. That's great. I think we need stronger support from the Congress, the people actually hold the purse to make those investments. So that is something that I think would be really important. And I'll close it up here for mine is the reason the United States needs to lead is not because we are the best nation in the world. We're not the best nation in the world, but we're trying to be the best nation in the world, right? All that talent of innovators comes here because we free up that capability, right? And for us to be able to maintain that, we need to be the fastest. We need to be the ones that unleash responsible sort of business ethics and leadership. And also, we need to preach what we say, and we need to promote our democratic values and norms, our free speeches, all of that that contributes to innovation. And in doing so, I think, you know, other nations will follow us. They'll try to replicate us. They'll try to steal our technology, our mindsets, everything. So I think that is where we need to be. And we need to welcome competition. Competition is great. That's how you come up with new ideas. So with that, we need to be, as a nation, we need to be a disruptive nation. You know, everybody needs to be disruptive. I don't want my kids to be disruptive, but innovation-wise, we need to be disruptive. With that, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Mir, and thank you, Robert, both for your time. Just to let folks know, Robert and I had an amazing chat on Space Talks with Z that's going to be released later this month. So please look out for that. And Mir will be an upcoming guest where we're going to convene a panel that he's going to lead for Space Talks as well. So those are going to be some highlights to delve deeper into the issues we raised here. Also for discussion, further discussion on cybersecurity, including cyber in space, please do check out our upcoming International Cybersecurity Innovation Summit on April 13th. Thank you, gentlemen, very much for your time today and for joining us. It's truly a pleasure.